Joining us now is Val Hale. Val, good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. You're a man that was known very well. You had many jobs in the private and public sector, most probably well known for your run as a BYU athletic director. I want to ask you some questions about what you've seen from the athletic department. But first, I want to talk about you, Mr. Val Hale. I had the opportunity to see you down at the LPGA tournament a couple weeks back, earlier in the month in Black Desert. And, you know, I've known you for many years. I've dined with you when you used to come out on the road sometimes with basketball. I've golfed with you. And I thought as I saw you walk, and I saw you first, and you were with your wife, and I saw you coming, and I thought, man, that's the Val Hale that I've known for years and years. Now, I knew a little bit about your health, but the stuff you told me, I did not realize that a priest came by and was administering last rites for you, but you've rebounded rather well.
Yeah, I've had a little bit of an interesting health journey over the last 13 years. I was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, and it culminated in a transplant in January. My son donated a kidney, and it's gone really well. I'm feeling great, back to golfing a little bit, and I'm really fortunate because I never really got sick through it all, and so it's turned out about as well as it possibly could.
Yeah, that's funny.
Good to see you, by the way.
No, thank you. It's funny. You could say you got a second lease on life, but you didn't get to that point. But you knew it was coming if you didn't have the transplant from your son. So it's just kind of an interesting situation there of what could have happened, but what didn't happen, and now it looks like everything is back to normal, right?
Yes, or as my wife would say, back to abnormal for me, so yes. And I was probably about a year and a half or so away from dialysis. And so the options were transplant or dialysis, and I didn't want to have to go through that. And so this worked out really well. I'm so happy and blessed.
And you were telling me you had like isolation up to weeks and months at a time because you were in a vulnerable position following the surgery. So you basically were isolated and just quarantined with your wife, and that was it.
Poor lady, 3 months worth.
Yeah.
Her mental health may never be the same.
And you couldn't do anything during that time?
We had to pretty much stay away from people. We would go walking every day for about 2 or 3 miles, and then we'd come back. We didn't really meet with family or anyone. It was pretty much the two of us for most of that time.
So you had a little round two, so to speak, of the COVID situation.
It was COVID 2.0, absolutely.
Yeah. And how about your son? How is he doing?
He's right back to normal. The recovery was a little bit harder for him in terms of it's a more invasive surgery to take the kidney out, I guess, than it is to put it back in. But after a few weeks, he was doing great, and he's back to perfect health right now.
Wow.
Doing really well.
I would imagine Father's Day between he and you will take on a little extra meaning this year.
Yeah, it will be for the rest of our life. We'll have a special bond. I'll always carry him in my heart and in my kidney. So
you created his life, and then he turned around and recreated or extended your life.
Exactly.
Yeah, yep. That's a crazy situation. And you are a sports person at heart, obviously, working for BYU for many years, moving your way up the ladder, and then got into the athletic directorship. And we just had a change. Official last week with Tom Homo, I believe was your successor, if I remember the timeline. And
that's
now Brian Santiago was working in the athletic department when you were athletic director, if I remember all that correctly. So you probably had some interaction with Brian. And, I did too. He came with Steve Cleveland. I believe, if I remember, you were the athletic director that hired Steve Cleveland. And so he brought...
That was actually Rondo.
Oh, was it Rondo?
Yeah.
Okay. You were then promoted and worked with these guys. Brian's a feisty guy, And, he's tried to show a softer side. I get that. I respect that of what he's trying to do to show people he can mature, because I don't think that someone should be judged by one or two isolated instances, and nor do I think they should be judged when they're 55 on how they behaved at 30, as long as, you weren't breaking the law in any of that, and no one is accusing Brian of doing that. But he does have a fiery nature, and he's learned how to control it and all that stuff. I mean, I've been around him enough. I've known him for I've known him for almost 30 years. But I do also know that, he's matured, and he worked his butt off to be in the position to succeed Tom Homo and got the job. So I'm happy for him. What's your assessment of the situation?
Well, I was the one that hired Brian in athletic administration. So he had been working, as you said, with Steve Cleveland as director of basketball operations, and Pete Whitbeck, who had been associate AD for 30 years, and pretty much ran all of the events. And he was the guy, as Rondo Feldberg would say, who wore the black hat in the department. Every athletic director, Rondo said, and I tend to agree, needs someone who can tell people no, do some of the, the dirty work, the things that have to be done that aren't so pleasant sometimes. And Pete wore that hat well. And when he was getting ready to retire, I looked around to see who could come in and do a lot of those things. And Brian obviously had shown that he could do some really amazing things working with Steve Cleveland. He was very thorough, and so I brought him on board. And the one thing that Brian does extremely well is get things done. He can, give him a task, and he would find a way to get it done. And he worked all hours of the day and night. He was, you said he's very competitive. Feisty was a good word that you used. He was that way when he played basketball. I remember going down to a basketball game at Fresno State when they were playing BYU, and he was knocking down threes and, getting in the face of the BYU guys. I mean, that's just when he's on the court, when he's in a competitive situation, that's how he is. And that's both good and bad, I guess, but that's what Brian is. And, there's been some negative criticism of Brian, and I'm sure that the people who hired him, Shane Reese and Keith Warkink, they heard some of that criticism. But the bottom line is the president and vice president are the most important people at the university when it comes to athletics, because they control all the authority to make ultimate decisions. The athletic director, pretty much has the authority to set the vision and the culture and everything else and make some decisions at the department level. But any significant decisions ultimately go to the vice president and the president, and then even the board of trustees. And so President Reese and Keith Warkink had to choose someone that they trusted with the program, someone who who they could work with. And that was ultimately the most important thing. And after interviewing what they said was 50 candidates, they chose Brian Santiago. I'm sure they knew, they had heard some of this negative stuff out there about Brian. And I'm almost positive they just sat down with Brian and said, Brian, we're going to hire you, but, this is what we've heard as we've been out and talked to people. This is what you're going to need to work on. This is something where you need to really work on and try to improve yourself in these areas. And that's totally to be expected, and I'm sure that's what they did. And so I'm sure Brian will try to be, a little softer where he can in dealing with people. The other thing he can do is make sure his right-hand man, has some of the strengths that he may not have. That's really a good leader does that, and I think that's something Brian will look to do. I think Brian's going to be fine. I think he's going to do a great job, and I liked working with him. Sometimes, when he got things done, I didn't ask him how he did it. I just said, Brian, go do this. Good job. You got it done,
Yeah, that's good. Val Hale, former BYU athletic director. You talk about the president and the vice president being above and having more authority than the athletic director. Well, part of leadership, I think, is certainly you would consult with the people below you, but sometimes you may also do what they say because you believe in them, in their ability and in their judgment. Do you think that that's going to be the case here, that even though there's two above Brian, that when he comes to them with a recommendation, there might be times, or maybe many times, that they simply say, okay, that's what we will do?
Absolutely. I think that's what good leaders do. I mean, they're hiring the guy that they trust, and now they will lean on him to bring them recommendations. And unless they have strong feelings otherwise, I think they would be wise to generally accept the recommendations. And then it's up to them, and this is the key role they play, it's up to them to then go convince the Board of Trustees. So, for instance, the last few years in college athletics, as you know, have been crazy.
Yep.
Can you imagine the president going up to the Board of Trustees and say, now we're going to pay 18-year-olds $7 million. Are you okay with that? I mean, I would have loved to be in the room to hear that conversation, but obviously they were successful in persuading them that, yeah, this is something that's going to benefit BYU. And I think Shane Reese, we've had some great athletic fans as presidents, and Shane Reese is probably right at the top of the list. That guy, you can tell he bleeds blue, he loves athletics, and he will advocate for BYU sports as much as anyone. And it really is one of his primary responsibilities to take Brian's recommendations, vet them, and then maybe even improve on them, and then take them to the Board of Trustees and say, this is where we need to go. This is a facility we need to build. This is something we need to consider we haven't done before. And that's a really important role. And I think Shane Reese does a great job and will do a great job in that regard.
Val Hale joining us. Yeah, I also heard that President Reese might listen to a certain morning sports talk show host that's been around for a while. That's dangerous right there. I'm not sure. I don't know that I'd advocate that. That's for sure. It's okay for the average fan, but I tell people who are in the business, don't bother with that. You might get yourself upset. So you speak to that, Val, and you saw so many changes while you were working there, and then you're still, you went on and worked in the private and public sector, as I said, but, you still observed and had thoughts, and myself too. I've been around for a long time here. I got to know many BYU coaches in many different sports. They would tell me stuff. Not most, but a lot of the stuff was off the record, so it stayed off the record. But one of the things that I had heard, and it's out there, it's not like it's any big secret, that BYU wasn't exactly extravagant in their spending. When some of the coaches left, they would say BYU was cheap relative to their new jobs. But all that has changed, it looks like, certainly. What is your level of observation, whether it be surprise or just getting with the times, whatever it might be? What do you think about these new ways financially with BYU?
Well, I wouldn't say surprised. Maybe I'm surprised at the level it's changed. As I mentioned in my book that I wrote last year, I have a little section on this. Lavelle, when I was athletic director, was the second lowest paid coach in the Mountain West Conference. I was my salary as athletic director ranked 112 out of 117 in America, in the NCAA. And it was just expected at BYU back then that if you worked there, you weren't going to get paid like everybody else. And that was a bit of a badge of honor for a long time.
Right.
And then I think kind of what happened was when Whittingham and the bidding war between Whittingham and Utah and BYU, I think that kind of ratcheted up the salaries a little bit and, got BYU thinking more. And it wasn't really. I knew that they were paying Kalani and Pope a lot more than what their predecessors had made, and actually made their salaries decent. But it wasn't until Kevin Young's salary came along and they reported that was the first time I went, "Holy cow! This is on a completely different level than it was before. And I think they've done a great job of getting their assistant coaches. I think Kalani and Kevin have said, look, if we're going to do this, we have to pay our assistant coaches what they're worth competitively, so they don't just leave. And so, hats off to them. I'll tell you, athletics today, Patrick, as you know, is all about money.
Yep.
It's about fundraising, and I think that's one of the reasons Brian Santiago got the job. He has great connections with some of these well-heeled individuals, and they like him, and, that's the name of the game. Right or wrong, good or bad, BYU has found a way to really fundraise, and with NIL and with other areas, coaches' salaries, they've done a great job. So, hats off to them for upping the ante and getting these coaches paid better. I remember a story Glenn Tuckett used to tell all the time. He'd go in for his annual interview with Ben Lewis, the vice president, and Ben would say, okay, Glenn, here's your salary this year. Please remember this is private and you're not to tell anyone. And he would say, well, don't worry, I'm just as embarrassed about it as you are. And that's kind of the way it was at BYU. But those days are over. It's a new era. The other thing that's interesting is, have you ever been to a basketball game and looked at all the coaches and staff they have behind the bench?
Oh, I know. My gosh. It's like 2-3 rows.
It just blows my mind. When Lavelle became head football coach, there were 6 coaches on the staff in 1972. 6. Utah State and Utah had 8, but BYU only had 6. And after he had that first year of 7-4, which was a big deal for BYU, he went to the administration and said, you know what, we need 8. So can I get 2 more coaches? And they said, yeah, because he had been successful. But, you go from 6 coaches in football. I don't know how many they have on the staff now, but it's a whole lot more than that. And then you do the same thing in basketball. It used to be you'd have, the head coach and 2 assistants, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
The world has changed. It has absolutely changed in the last, 25 years. It's crazy.
You spoke of the book. What's its title, and how is it available?
It's called Out of the Blue, an insider's look at the rise of BYU athletics. And it's really a story of my journey through the athletic department. Pretty much covers the period Lavelle, early 70s through 2004. And, I think it's been well received. It's available at Deseret Book, Amazon. You can order it on my website, outofthebyublue.com. I'll sign it for you for Father's Day for a gift if you'd like, outofthebyublue.com. And, I got it out before Christmas because I knew this transplant was coming, and it did quite well. And people have responded well to it. And, I think it's just an easy read, something that people will remember some of the stories. They'll learn new things. They'll take a look behind the scenes maybe at how different things got done during that period. And it was an exciting time, as during the athletic department. Today we've come to expect excellence, but back in the 70s and early 80s, it was all new and exciting as BYU was making this rise to national prominence in football, and it was just a fun time, in the Ty Detmer era, Steve Young era, the whole journey through that process, and so I think people will enjoy it.
All right, Val, I'm glad you're in good health and you're doing well. Hope to see you again here soon, and I appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us this morning.
It's always great to talk to you, Patrick.
All right, there you go. That's Val Hale, former BYU athletic director, with some insight into his health and what that entailed, and also BYU Out of the Blue. You heard available in many different places. Get an inside look at BYU as they rose to prominence in the athletic department. And Steve Cleveland brought Brian Santiago aboard. He will be joining us in about 20 minutes, so stay with us right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.